All right. Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
We are coming at you from our new studio here in Crooked Media headquarters.
I see a familiar curtain.
It's a work in progress.
I see a new fern-like thing. That's definitely a fake plant.
Elijah told us we have to comment on the public access nature of the studio for those who are going to see video clips of this.
This looks like
For you listening to this, it doesn't really matter.
This looks like when Laura Trump was doing Trump TV.
It's got a real Wayne's World vibe for you millennials who like things that came before your time.
For you millennials, that
For anyone who knows that
parents'
reference.
favorite movies.
I love that movie. Anyway, today on the pod, Tommy has an interview with Johanna Hayes, a first-time candidate and former National Teacher of the Year who could make history this fall as the first African-American Democrat ever elected to the Congress from Connecticut. We'll also talk about the latest in the Trump investigation, as well as the corrupt goons who are running Washington.
Doesn't narrow it down, John.
I know. Just one. Well, sorry, let's cut that. Love it. How was Love It or Leave It?
So good,
Last
John.
week. Was it amazing?
Birthday edition?
Yes, it was a birthday edition. They made me dab.
I saw that.
We also had Lauren Mayberry of Churches came by, and she did a dramatic reading of Omarosa's prologue. We had an awesome panel. It was a great show. You should check it out.
Did Travis just put on the screen, make him dab? If he says no, chant until he dabs?
Yes.
It's great.
They did do that.
That's such a good joke.
And then I dabbed.
Congrats.
Thanks.
You're like Paul Ryan.
Anyway, so listen to that for the dabbing. Tommy, I know that you just recorded a fresh Pod Save the World today.
I did. I talked with former deputy director, former acting CIA director, he was both, Michael Morrell, about the John Brennan and other national security officials' security clearance dust up with President Trump over the weekend. Why is it a big deal?
It's a real Donnybrook.
It's the fight we should be picking. We got when it's a great detail, all the context, all you need to know. So check it out.
And for Pod Save the World fans and any fans of U.S. foreign policy, there's a brand new Wilderness episode out today that is called The Blob. It is about Democrats and foreign policy and national security.
Ben Rhodes' favorite set of people.
We got Ben Rhodes, we got Samantha Power, we got Marcy Wheeler, Jake Sullivan, all your favorites. Matt Duss. It's going to be great. What are you laughing at?
Just by Avengers Assemble.
Also, you know, we told you we were going to make an announcement. We had a big announcement on Colbert last pod.
Mm-hmm.
That announcement was Vote Save America. Go to votesaveamerica.com. Vote Save America is basically our initiative to make sure that everyone is registered to vote, allow you to find campaign events in your area so you can go help out and volunteer, and you'll get to look at your ballot, a sample ballot.
It's a one-stop shop, John.
Now, the key here, a couple of things. One, when this idea first surfaced, when we were talking about it, we were like, that has to already exist. Turns out it didn't. So thank God Tanya Somanader is here. She worked at the White House Digital Office. She helped us pull this together, along with Shaniko, our political director. But not all the features we just described are ready yet. It takes a while to put together your ballot. Like, the state doesn't necessarily have all the polling locations, so don't get upset if it's not there, but you need to sign up now so we can get you the information that you need when it's all available.
Yeah.
It's worth it. It's something we think will help people just be engaged.
Right now,
cool.
Right now, the best thing to do is sign up with your email, and what you can do now is check your voting registration and register online. And like you said, Tommy, as we get into September and October, all the other good stuff will be there.
But already there's a ton of events listed. So when you actually sign up, it tells you what you can do, where you are to participate right now, which is a great first step.
And even more importantly, just share it. Put it on your Facebook page. Tweet it out. Like, tell all your friends about it, because we have no stake in this besides democracy. This is a tool we paid to assemble because we want to make it easier for people to vote and get engaged. That's the whole thing. And so we hope people use it.
Yeah, do it. All right, let's get to the news. There were quite a few developments in the investigation into the gang of dipshits running the government right now. So let's just go through them one by one.
Great.
On Friday, Special Counsel Robert Mueller recommended in a memo that former Trump aide George Papadopoulos serve up to 6 months in prison for the crime of lying to the FBI, which he pled guilty to. Mueller says that Papadopoulos' repeated lies about his contacts with Russian officials during the 2016 campaign caused damage to the government's investigation. Tommy, what did we learn from Mueller's filing here? Anything useful?
I think we learned, well, with all things George Papadopoulos, it's hard to tell whether he's just very stupid or very stupid and hiding some very bad behavior, but it's certainly a combination of both. I think a lot of people thought that Papadopoulos was cooperating constantly and offering all kinds of good information. In fact, that's not the case according to Mueller. In this document, it says he lied to conceal his contacts with Russians and Russian intermediaries, which the government says prevented them from adequately questioning key witnesses. There's this Professor Mifsud, who was in the United States. Papadopoulos didn't explain how important he was in real time, so Mifsud went back to wherever he is now, and they were unable to fully question him. So, we learned that George isn't like Mueller's golden goose, but he's an important witness, and he also is a reminder that the Steele dossier is not how this whole Russia probe started. It started with an offer of dirt on Hillary Clinton to a bunch of officials, and George got drunk and bragged about it.
Yeah, and even though he's clearly not the star witness here, the filing showed just how extensive I thought the investigation is, because the memo says the defendant did not provide, quote, substantial assistance, and much of the info provided came only after the government confronted him with his own emails, text messages, internet search history, and other info it had obtained via search warrants and subpoenas.
Including a phone he used while he was in the UK,
Oh, yeah.
which he used to talk with this professor at great length, and it was the fourth proffer session where he was like, "Oh, you want the London phone? Why didn't you say that?" Like, this guy's in some trouble.
I mean, that is pretty stupid. And we should end by saying he still has legal exposure on potential additional charges relating to, acting as a foreign agent, conspiracy to defraud the United States, all the other good stuff Mueller's looking into. What do you think, Lovett?
George Papadopoulos is what, technically speaking, is he's a dope. He's a real dope. And he's going through quite a little Martin Shkreli phase on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think it ends well for him.
Yeah, he's like 4 tweets away from buying a Wu-Tang album that no one else can have.
It's really not good. But anyway, when you staff your campaign with criminals in the dregs of Republican politics, some of them are going to end up in jail.
That's right.
Well, on that note, let's move on to the next goon.
Which one?
The New York Times reported over the weekend that White House counsel Don McGahn has been extensively cooperating with Mueller's team, sitting for at least three voluntary interviews that have lasted more than 30 hours altogether.
Well, you know what I say, John?
What's that?
What's good for the goose is good for the McGahn. That's what I always say.
The Times reported McGahn and his attorney couldn't understand why Trump was so willing to let him speak with Mueller's team, but that Trump's attorneys felt their client had nothing to hide.
So
Trump
funny.
apparently was also mistaken that the White House counsel represents him personally and is there to defend his interests, not to represent the White House and the office of the presidency itself. The Times followed up with a report on Monday that Trump's lawyers still have no idea what McGahn told Mueller's team when he met with them. Though then there was a sort of a late-breaking Washington Post story before we started recording that said McGahn's lawyer in an email said that he does not believe that McGahn incriminated the president in his testimony, and that in fact he sent an email to a bunch of people in the White House and the legal team saying he did not incriminate him.
Also, can we just pause for a moment to say that's where things are at the White House, where McGahn has his lawyer. Hey, can you do me a favor? I'm getting real weird vibes at work. Would you mind just sending an email for me? I think if I send it, it's weird. So would you mind sending it? And don't even say that I asked you to send it. Just send it. That says I didn't incriminate the president in federal crimes because I work with these people. Like, you don't understand. I work with them every day. It's so weird there now.
Well, it's funny. I mean, they did say, like, well, if he had incriminated the president, if he had witnessed the president committing any crimes, he surely would have resigned, because I'm sure he's a man of upstanding character.
Again, a hilarious standard. I think you'll know the president is a criminal because that's when I'll quit.
Tommy, how significant is this story?
It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, one initial thought I had when I was reading it was I could finally appreciate how frustrated Trump must be with this whole process, because he picks up the paper and he learns about how his White House counsel is cooperating far more than he ever knew with the investigation that could take down his presidency. And now he's in a position where if he fires McGahn, it could be used against him in an obstruction case. So that sucks. I don't really feel sympathy for him, but I get why he's pissed. There's some question, though, about the motive behind this leak. Marcy Wheeler, who we've had on the show, really strongly pushed back on the idea that McGahn is cooperating here by choice and that he's really doing anything special because as the White House counsel, he's the government's lawyer. He's the lawyer for the office of the presidency, and he doesn't have the chance to assert attorney-client privilege like you would in a normal case. And Bob Bauer writes about this on Lawfare. It's pretty well-established law. So they're trying to make this argument that they've been incredibly transparent with the investigation. Trump's team loves to cite the fact that they've turned over 1 million pages of documents, but a lot of this is sort of a smokescreen because if you're turning over like 1 million pages of emails that are news clippings, it's sort of meaningless. Like the key is that Trump still hasn't sat for an interview. Bush and Cheney did during the Plame investigation. So the other key thing that Marcy pointed out was McGahn, and this whole article is about the obstruction of justice charges. It doesn't say if Mueller asked McGahn about Russian collusion specifically, even though he was the key lawyer on the case on these issues. So
on the campaign.
I'm sorry. He was the key lawyer on the campaign about these issues. He's like a campaign finance expert. So McGahn faces real risk here, and it sort of glosses over that fact. But I don't know. I just think it's so awesome that McGahn apparently decided to be really helpful and cooperative because one day Trump's other lawyers, Ty Cobb and John Dowd, went to a fancy steak place and, talked a little too loud at lunch, and a New York Times reporter heard them bitching about Don McGahn. And so he was like, well, these guys are trying to screw me. I'm going to go cooperate with Mueller, and this place is just a snake pit, and it's going to kill them all.
It seemed as if, from all the reporting, that McGahn believed that Trump may make him the fall guy for obstruction and be like, well, I was given advice by my White House counsel that I could take these actions, whether it was firing Comey, whether it was telling Comey to let Flynn off, all this kind of stuff. And he remembers that John Dean, President Nixon's counsel, they tried to set him up as the fall guy for Watergate. Dean obviously pled guilty to obstruction charges and then cooperated with the government to help bring down Nixon. And so from McGahn's point of view, he's thinking, I want to cover my ass. I want to cooperate with Mueller. And like you said, and if I don't cooperate with Mueller now, he could subpoena me anyway.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been a lot of reporting about whether Trump thinks Trump did anything wrong. What seems to me as obvious, what seems to me is obvious is that Don McGahn doesn't believe that Don McGahn facilitated Donald Trump breaking the law at the White House. And so it would make sense to me that he would try to protect himself. But Bob Bauer made this point about the fact that, and Tommy, you made it too, that McGahn is required to cooperate. To me, what's more interesting, I am less interested in the kind of meting out of guilt, like, is Trump trying to drop the dime on McGahn? Is McGahn trying to protect himself, whether it's from what happened during the campaign or what happened in the White House? What to me is more interesting and important is the White House counsel had to spend 30 hours talking to Robert Mueller because of all he knows around this investigation and how wrapped up his office now is into a series of investigations into very serious federal crimes, which is, as Bob Bauer pointed out, it's a unique situation for the White House counsel to be in, to have been to be a witness in this way, and to continue and to be a witness while continuing to play the role of White House counsel.
Well, and all the president's lawyers and a lot of the people in the White House have said for a long time, oh, we don't believe that it's possible that Donald Trump could be charged with obstruction of justice or could be guilty of obstruction of justice or could be impeached for obstruction of justice, right? Like, we don't think this is a real thing. And clearly, Don McGahn doesn't believe that because that's why Don McGahn sat down and wanted to cooperate about this. Now, the question is, why did Trump let McGahn do it?
And then that seems to be a whole other set of problems. I mean, like, there seems to be a couple buckets of frustration. One, everyone's mad that McGahn's lawyer didn't fully brief Trump's legal team on how much he said, how long he said it, et cetera. Two, there was this early strategy where Trump's lawyers, for some reason, believed him when he said he didn't do anything wrong, knowing that he has a long history of lying to everyone, including his family and lawyers. And they decided, let's fully cooperate with this inquiry. And then, the Rudy Giulianis of the world have shut it down since. McGahn was opposed to that strategy from day one. It sounds like Steve Bannon has been on the record forever saying that participating or cooperating with the investigation was a mistake. So that fight is happening. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a bunch of largely incompetent people who don't trust each other, battling it out constantly. It's like it's going to be a horrible outcome.
Even Trump himself can't help but reveal the underlying criminality we're all assuming as part of this conversation, because he's saying things like, Don McGahn's no rat.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, that was my favorite tweet.
You can't rat somebody out for not breaking the law. That's not how ratting people out works.
Also,
have you not watched anything? I know you fast forward through the non-violent parts of movies, but have you not caught a conversation in Goodfellas?
The villain in the Nixon White House starts with Nixon, and he's like, how dare you rat on Richard Nixon?
I mean, we can sort of get caught up in the details of like who's ratting out who and everything.
Right.
Well, I want to step back for a second. All these assholes in the White House are telling Axios that McGahn was a helpful witness to Trump. They're glad he cooperated because he was helpful. And they said, quote, in the 2 meetings to discuss firing Comey, the president was instructed by aides that this is not going to end the investigation. It's only going to make it worse. The heat will be turned up. And Trump said, I understand that, but I have no confidence in him, so I'm going to fire him. That's a good fact, said the source. First of all, can anyone imagine Donald Trump saying, I have no confidence in him anymore, I'm going to fire him? Of course not. But also, like, that, we know that's all bullshit because Donald Trump told Lester Holt why he fired Jim Comey, and then, which is because of the Russia thing, and then the next day in the Oval Office, when they were fucking the Russian foreign minister in there, Donald Trump said to them, oh, the pressure's off me now because I got rid of Comey and he was on my ass about that Russia thing.
There are no, also, like, well, Donald Trump, what he cares about most of all is competence in the people who serve at his administration. Right. Loyalty, disloyalty, help him, hurt him. What matters to him is the faithful execution of our laws. Give me a break.
Also, I was reminded that Trump tried to get Don McGahn to deny a New York Times report that said Trump had pressured him to fire Mueller. And McGahn had to remind him, like, hey, boss, you actually did do that. Even though Trump
forgot about
right,
that.
And then Trump went and told Rob Porter, another great guy working in this White House, to tell McGahn that if he refused to make a statement denying the story, that he'd be fired. And McGahn, again, refused. So, like, of course he doesn't trust anybody.
And then McGahn told that to Mueller.
Again, it's like all the ways he obstructed.
So meta.
Again, ask Comey for a loyalty pledge. Ask Comey to let Flynn go. Fires Comey. Tries to fire Mueller. What else? Tries to get Sessions to fire Mueller. Publicly pressures Sessions to fire Mueller.
Says today that he can take over the investigation anytime if he wants.
Again, the legal thing here is a corrupt intent. Intent to obstruct justice.
It's also like you can step even further back from all of this. So much of the stories. You guys talked about this on Thursday, that so much is happening out in the open, but we're constantly searching for that secret that's gonna make the new difference. It's gonna change everybody's mind. Here again, what we are seeing is extraordinary reporting that the White House counsel has spent 30 hours again and again sitting down with an investigation into the president, the White House, and his campaign for crimes, including conspiracy and obstruction of justice. There's a lot of speculation as to why that interview happened, what's the outcome of it, what does it mean. The fact that it has so embroiled this White House is in and of itself a very, very big deal, and actually the only thing we know for sure.
So let's talk about the White House reaction to this news. Trump obviously taking it all in stride.
Cool. Cucumber.
He, first said that
he's like a sea cucumber, a little threat, and he explodes half his body.
Yeah, he said that McGahn spoke with Mueller because he allowed it, and then he attacked the New York Times, John Brennan, Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, Jeff Sessions, Hillary Clinton, Bob Mueller, his DOJ lawyers, who he called disgraced, discredited thugs, and compared them all to Joseph McCarthy.
That was.
So do these seems like the musings of an innocent man?
My favorite, there were so many good tweets, but my favorite tweet was Trump saying that members of the media are calling the White House to complain about the New York Times story because it's such fake news. It's like
Maria Bartiromo or something.
Yeah, right. Like maybe he's like commiserating with Sean Hannity at the golf club or whatever. But I love the idea that like beat reporters are calling up the White House switchboard, being like, "I'd like to call to complain about the New York Times."
It's Dan Bell's like, "Hey, I want to shoot this shit with the president. I'm really bummed about this Times story."
Again, it's like everyone's like, well, if he's innocent, he thinks he did nothing wrong. We're told by all of his staff and reporters. Right? If he did anything wrong, why is he acting like this? Maybe because he's fucking guilty.
Or crazy, or both.
Or both, yeah, I don't know.
My second favorite was him encouraging us to, quote, study the late Joseph McCarthy because Mueller and his gang make Joseph McCarthy look like a baby. One, that's a weird image and comment. Two, like, McCarthy's famously harassed and publicly humiliated officials and made claims about them without evidence, i.e. the Trump playbook. And
Trump's lawyer was Roy Cohen.
Trump used to employ his lawyer. It's like, it's just, the ironies are so rich, it's hard to even grasp them all.
Also, what Donald Trump knows about Joe McCarthy, I would love, God, what a thing it would be to sit Donald Trump down and just hand him a pad. What a thing it would be to have Donald Trump in a room, hand him a pad and a pencil and say, write down everything you know about Joe McCarthy. Right top to bottom. Give me all the facts you've got. I think that he would not be able, maybe
what state
double
is he from?
Yeah. What did he do for money?
What year?
He knows nothing.
He was
study Joe McCarthy. He hasn't studied anything since.
He was very well known during Frederick Douglass's time. They're both getting more well known.
Mike Kevin's brother? Yeah. I know him.
So anyway, Trump's reaction was typical Trump, and then his lawyer Rudy Giuliani went on the Sunday shows and just crushed it for his client in a back and forth on Meet the Press with NBC's Chuck Todd about whether Trump should meet with Mueller for an interview, as well as they talked about the exposure Trump might have to perjury charges. Rudy said, "Truth isn't truth," which just, Chuck just started laughing, and it's ridiculous. But also, everyone's talking about the truth isn't truth thing. Rudy also lied dozens of times about the investigation during that interview, only some of it which were fact-checked on air. Lovett, you were tweeting about this on Sunday. What is Rudy's strategy on these shows, and why does that strategy sort of make him a difficult guest to interview?
Yeah. I mean, there's this fundamental problem of having people like Rudy on television. Rudy has this vague, confusing way of speaking, but it's offered as common sense, like from a place of wisdom, like, Chuck, you're being crazy. Let me tell you how this really works. How it really works is up is down. Everyone's stupid but me. And it's from a place of, it's as if from a place of wisdom and strength, but of course it's frazzled and hard to understand and improvised and full of factually inaccurate renderings of the case against Donald Trump. The problem is, so lying in real time is a lot easier than fact-checking in real time. And, I saw that there was this big pile on Chuck Todd for, he should have known that the email said this. She should have known and had been ready with that fact. Okay. Maybe there was a place for a follow-up immediately right there that he shouldn't have missed. Fine. But let's not, we shouldn't be that officious about this, because it's really hard, because Trump people lie on television. They do it constantly. And, in print, people can break something down, take their time, show where the inaccuracies are, show where the confusing kind of word maze doesn't actually hang together. But in real time, you don't just have to have facts on the ready. For a fact to be effective on television, you have to deploy it, and then it has to show weakness in your opponent. When someone like Chuck Todd or Jake Tapper or John Dickerson is facing Kellyanne Conway or Rudy Giuliani or Sarah Huckabee Sanders or any of them, they have to offer a fact, and then you have to see if that fact exposes them some way. I didn't understand until Trump was president that facts and shame are tied together, that like facts are the carrot and shame is the stick. Because these people, like when you throw a fact at Rudy Giuliani, he doesn't seem injured by it. He doesn't seem chastened by it. He doesn't seem weakened by it. He just withdraws to some new generality to get out of the problem in the moment. And it works because shamelessness is an incredible shield on television, because as long as you don't look weak, it doesn't look like you've lost.
I get that to an extent. I agree that television as a medium makes that a problem, because you only have a certain number of minutes to interview someone and they can just bullshit their way through it. But I think we've also seen instances where, and Chuck has done this effectively in the past, and Jake Tapper's done this effectively. You sort of, at some point when someone's lying to you, you throw out the script for the rest of the questions that you have for that person, and you actually do dig in on the one lie and keep going. Now, what does it get you in the end? Like, at the end of the interview, does Rudy Giuliani throw up his hands and say, "I give up, he's guilty"? Like, no, that doesn't happen. But I mean, what happened was, Giuliani said to Chuck, all they knew was that a woman with a Russian name was going to meet with them. They didn't know she represented the Russian government. This was in reference to the Trump Tower meeting and meeting with this the Russian lawyer. And Of course, they did know she was a representative from the Russian government because
Said it in the email.
So that was
Stated clearly
It was
in the
stated
email.
in an email that Don Jr. tweeted out for all of us to see.
Yes.
So
Back when he was George Papadopoulos on Twitter.
right?
Yeah.
Look, it's not a major error, but you do wonder if what would have happened if Chuck said, "No,
Yeah.
no, Mr. Giuliani. Of course, that's not Mr. Mayor. That's not true at all."
In Chuck's defense, is like you're like it's hard to have all the facts ready, like on the tip of your tongue. It's also hard when you're doing a remote interview. You have like an earpiece in, you can half hear them. But just back to like the truth isn't truth comment. Like it's a bizarre soundbite, but the longer statement is sort of worse because he's trying to say that if two people offer a different account of an event, it's impossible to ever know what really happened. So Trump shouldn't sit down for an interview. Isn't that literally what happens in every court case where you don't plead guilty? Rudy Giuliani was a prosecutor. What is he talking about? He just like throws different rational like generalizations at the wall all day long.
He doesn't seem well.
Nonsensical.
He doesn't
But that's-
he
seems unwell. Or look, let's just say it. A lot of people speculate that he drinks before a lot of the evening interviews, and like
he's not.
seems
but
that
this
way.
is
He's certainly lost a step.
But this is why though it is such a challenge, and I don't like the way people just watch and wait for the chance to. Here's what I would have asked. Like Rudy Giuliani goes on there. It is a blizzard. It is a torrent of bullshit. Some of it are just complete factual inaccuracies. Some of them are kind of a spurious analysis about how the law works from his experience as a prosecutor, which he's sort of using, like he's sort of arguing from experience in a way that's hard to refute because like, wait, that's not how I understand it to be. This doesn't make sense to me. It's pure gaslighting. But there's something else about this too, because it is hard to fact check in real time. It is hard to deal with someone who's just making shit up and improvising on the fly. But what I was thinking about in watching these interviews is that the worst thing for a host to say is not, wait, you're wrong, or wait, that's inaccurate. It's, I don't know. So none of these people can ever say during an interview, you're making that claim. I'm actually not sure if that's accurate. Something about that doesn't. When we come back, I want to go back to you on that. Or they don't come back from commercial and say, you know what, I should have followed up on this just to verify this claim, because we still demand that the host of these Sunday shows speak from this position of authority, sitting between two equal sides, and I'm sympathetic to it because the shows are based on a kind of naive but honorable notion about how debate is supposed to work. Two people show up. They are ultimately maybe biased, but seeking the truth and coming with faith in their own ideas and battling it out. And they may spin, but you're there to help kind of navigate between spin and fact and help people figure out what happens at the end of this conversation and help them navigate the truth. But when you have someone like Rudy that goes on television and is like up his triangle, well, it's tough.
They have not updated these shows to the reality of a world in which one party is not based in fact or truth anymore, and it's just all bad faith all the way down.
Right.
And I do think you have to ask, at some point, the people who do these interviews, you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of having this person on? What is the goal here? Is it to convey a better understanding of the issues to the American people? And because if that's the case, it's not doing so because these people are liars.
Right.
So is it
tough.
just to allow both sides on to both give their spin? And if it's lies, then it's lies, and we'll just move on? Because then, that's sort of where it's at right now.
Right. I mean, so I'm sympathetic because, all these hosts have talked about it. Like, there has to be a bias towards having officials from the government, the White House, on your show. And I guess that to me, the compromise is, I think you're right. I think you do have to have Kellyanne Conway on. I think you do have to have Sarah Huckabee Sanders on, or Rudy Giuliani as the president's lawyer in the middle of an incredible investigation. But it just means that the work is harder. You have to be ready for the fact that these people are not just going to spin you; they're going to lie to your face.
So coming attractions, Michael Cohen, who the New York Times reported on Sunday is under investigation for bank fraud of more than $20 million.
Not good.
So anyway, the New York Times reported that he may be indicted or charged by the end of the month. So that's something that may happen.
The end of the month is so soon.
It's so soon. The Times reported that prosecutors are particularly interested in loans obtained by taxi businesses that he and his family own, and he's also under investigation for potential campaign finance crimes related to arrangements made to buy the silence of women who alleged to have had affairs with Donald Trump.
And that goes right to Trump. I mean, also, these guys are just sloshing around in money. $20 million? For this bozo? Also,
he's so dumb.
Also,
it's so hard to make $20 million legally.
This is where our friend...
When you're that dumb.
This is where John Dean comes back. John Dean, again, was Nixon's White House counsel. He initially helped cover up Nixon's involvement in Watergate, but later cooperated. The funniest thing that happened this weekend was Michael Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, telling Politico that he's been in touch with John Dean just to talk best practices, just to see how things went back in the day. That must make Trump's head explode reading that.
Yeah. Yes. So
Also,
Cohen.
John Dean went to jail.
Yeah, but he pleaded down for a lesser sentence.
Yeah.
Cohen's out there. It looks like he could get charged, and if he does, he's already sent quite a few signals that he will cooperate, and they do. And the Times reported this, that any cooperation deal will probably include, will almost definitely include, an agreement to cooperate with Mueller on his investigation, even though they're two separate issues.
Can I say something, John?
Sure.
I've had a long running beef with Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's lawyer, and
Yeah.
it occurs to me now that I'd like to offer an olive branch. Now, I do believe that Lanny Davis represents everything that's wrong in Washington and everything that's wrong with Democratic politics. However, if in his role as the lawyer for Michael Cohen, he helps bring down Donald Trump, I will apologize. I will praise him publicly.
I won't.
Why? He's getting paid.
Yeah. Some other lawyer could have done the same thing. You think?
I withdraw my offer.
You think it's a genius move to tell Michael Cohen it might be in his best interest to cooperate with Robert Mueller?
You basically just tickled Lanny with your olive branch and then yanked it back.
I take
Wow,
it back.
how did he ever come up with that one?
I take it back. Lanny, you're a sleaze. You
Okay.
can't win me back.
So let's talk about corruption, but let's broaden it out from the Trump White House to the broader Republican Party. And this is more in the legalized corruption realm. There was a story in the New York Times over the weekend that basically tells you everything you need to know about the alliance between filthy rich Republicans and Donald Trump. Here's the lead. Republicans are struggling to make the $1.5 trillion Trump tax cuts a winning issue with voters, but the cuts are helping the party in another crucial way, unlocking tens of millions of dollars in campaign donations from the wealthy conservatives and corporate interests that benefited handsomely from it. It goes on to highlight donors like Sheldon Adelson, who got $700 million from the Trump tax cuts and then donated $30 million to Paul Ryan's super PAC. Other donors include oil companies and Wall Street types. And the best part is, very few of the super PAC ads that they are funding talk about the tax cut at all because they know it's not popular with the rest of the base.
Do you think that Sheldon Adelson gave Paul Ryan 5 stars when he added that tip? Or
I mean,
or what?
my reaction to this story was like, yeah, no shit, right? Like the Koch brothers aren't good guys. They cut the Republicans huge checks because they get 10x a return on their investments. So they don't even try to hide it. I mean, my favorite part of this story, check it out online. There's a photo of this guy, Corey Bliss, who's the executive director of the elitist super PAC in the story. And it's like someone called him and said, Corey, the New York Times is writing a story about how we're giving away money to fat cats. And he was like, honey, hold my putter while I run down to the club and get my pink tie and my baby blue supper jacket to pose for this photo. This guy looks ridiculous. And it's like, yeah, they just lean into it. They don't give a shit.
And it also says a lot about sort of the alliance between the Trump populist nationalists and the rest of the Republican Party that's sort of dying off right now. It's completely phony. It's like Trump campaigns, I'm going to be a champion for working people, right? His only legislative achievement in office is a tax cut, $1 trillion+ tax cut for the biggest corporations and rich people.
That will raise taxes on poor people.
That will raise taxes on poor people. That while he was trying to pass, multiple Republican politicians said out loud, if we don't pass this tax cut, my donors told me their wallets are shut. That's at Chris Collins, who was arrested for insider trading.
From the White House lawn, by
was
the way.
caught saying, my donors are basically saying, get it done or don't ever call me again. So they get it done. They pass the tax cut. It goes to all these rich people. And then what do? They pour it back into these ads to keep control of the Republican Congress. But they don't advertise the tax cuts in the ads. In the ads, they talk about how brown people are going to come and kill your family. They talk about MS-13. They talk about immigration. They talk about all the other things. They don't talk about tax cuts because that's not what the base wants.
It's a 3-step process. Step 1, massive unpopular debt finance tax cuts for the rich and deregulation. Step 2, the rich take a tiny portion of it. They fund dishonest campaigns to get Republican voters to go along with the program by using immigrants, black athletes, China, and Democrats with the help of a propaganda network. Step 3, slashing of public goods like education, healthcare, transit, roads, and unleashing of private ills by rewriting rules around pollution, worker safety, corporate transparency, and all the rest. And you know, I was very angry reading it. And we talk a lot about this sort of dirty deal between Paul Ryan and Donald Trump, but it really is that is a side deal to what this is about, which is ultimately the bargain between nationalism and capitalism. And the consequence is a kind of inequality and unfairness.
It's an oligarchy.
It saps.
It is.
It's an oligarchy.
It saps the bonds of society. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that in this election we're trying to prove that this bargain didn't pay off for them and that saving the country depends on that being true.
Well, what step doesn't occur in the process you outlined is investment in the economy or wage increases or job creation. I mean, what happened is stock buybacks are up to $1 trillion, or expected to be $1 trillion this year. That's up 80% from this period last year. So these are not investing at all. They're not creating new jobs. They're buying shares in the company that the CEOs mostly own, the workers don't own. So they make money and they can flip the stock.
And the way you keep it running is with a giant propaganda machine. That is the key, right? And so part of that propaganda are these super PACs and the super PAC ads and all the political stuff they're doing. The other part is Fox News and the media machine that they all run, and Breitbart and all that stuff. And it's very instructive that the story the propaganda machine tells is not how free market capitalism will cure all the ills in the world. Yeah. The story they tell is that, liberal elites are, letting in all kinds of immigrants and refugees to destroy the country.
China's the fault. That's why we need a trade war. Yeah.
But I do think that Democrats need to tell that story and expose that truth and just sort of be honest about what's going on.
Yeah. And not worry about having been called class warfare, because it's being waged on us all day, every day.
Right.
Yeah.
The Times also had another piece that we should just mention before we move on that connects to this. The man who has led the EPA's Clean Air Office since the fall, William Wareham, is also an attorney who represented a coal-burning trade association that's been pushing for these changes. The administration is taking advantage of a failing in ethics rules that basically allows someone who was an attorney for carbon polluters to draft policy at the EPA from the inside. So that doesn't sound so great.
No, it's not great. I mean, there were a whole bunch of rules put in place that prevented you from working in an agency that you had just recently lobbied. But there's essentially a loophole here for someone who is an attorney for these provisions. But this guy is the ultimate fox in the henhouse. He knows all the things that need to be dismantled for the industry. And essentially, it sounds like he's been going through their wish list during his tenure there. So again, it's good for the Times for finding the story and for covering it in great detail. But all these massive, decades-long problems are being caused for us in terms of the environment and all these other places, while we're focused on the other distractions of the day.
Yeah.
Reading the news, it really was some of the most outrageous stories I think we have seen since Trump was president, and it is so much more destructive and so much more damaging than the kind of Trump show. So what this is about is the fact that when coal plants make changes, they are supposed to make sure that they adhere to rules around pollution, to make sure that when they modify or renovate or expand at a plant, that these plants will abide by rules to keep the air safe, that go along with regulations that have changed or been expanded since the plant came online, what have you. And basically, this guy, in representing this plant, is saying, you have to take our word for it in terms of the protections against pollution we put in place, that the EPA doesn't get to approve it, that the EPA doesn't get to revise it. And it's incredibly dangerous because it's basically a license to pollute. And it's something that the EPA's own regulators were against. It's something that the Obama administration was against. There is no justification for it, except if you don't give a shit about the damage it does to people, the years off of people's lives that happen because of coal pollution. If all you care about is rewarding corporate donors and corporate interests that fund your campaign and protect you while you're in office.
So the final thing that Republicans are doing here, aside from all the corruption and the super PAC stuff and the propaganda that they're doing to sort of maintain power, has to do with voting and voter suppression. Mm-hmm. And so there was some news about that this week. Republicans are moving a plan in Georgia to close 2/3 of the polling places in a majority African-American county. Officials in Randolph County which is about 2.5 hours south of Atlanta, are moving on a plan to shutter 7 of the 9 polling sites there, a rural county with limited access to public transportation. The ACLU is fighting the effort, and voting rights activists are getting a petition drive off the ground to fight back. So this is so blatant what they're trying to do here. And also, this
keep in mind you have Stacey Abrams, who could be the first African-American governor of Georgia on the ballot. I mean, it's as direct as could possibly be.
Yeah.
And Brian Kemp, her opponent. Name's Brian, right? Brian?
Sean Kemp. I'm just kidding.
And Brian Kemp, her opponent, who spent 8 years as Secretary of State in Georgia, removing hundreds of thousands of voters from the rolls.
Yeah, he's the top election official in the state, running for governor, making it as easy for himself as possible to run for governor.
And
it is disgusting.
Yeah, and again, this is happening specifically in states like Georgia, like Texas, like North Carolina, where the demographics are such that the more people of color make up a higher percentage of the voting population, or an increasing percentage of the voting population. And so in order to hold on to power, Republicans are trying in every way they can to suppress the vote and make it harder for people to vote.
Yeah. It's when you want to pursue massively unpopular policies that only benefit a tiny subset of the population, you have to convince a bunch of people to vote against their interests and then stop a bunch of other people from voting who would try to stop you.
This all goes back to a god-awful Supreme Court decision in 2013 that gutted the Voting Rights Act. And this would have been prevented, but instead all these southern states that had a history of doing these kinds of things, these voter suppression tactics like voter ID laws or gerrymandering, are now allowed to enact these proposals without federal approval. And it's another reason why Democrats need to vote and be motivated by Supreme Court nominations, because these are decisions that will be screwing us over for decades.
The case was so crazy. This was this 2013 case. And basically what happened is, part of the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, southern states with a history of segregation, anytime you changed the voting laws, you had to seek approval from the federal government. And so therefore it prevented a lot of these southern states from instituting Jim Crow-like voting laws.
Which they immediately put back in place the second the thing was repealed.
Right, and as part of the repeal, John Roberts, writing for the majority in the case, said, well, the country has changed since 1965. There's not as much racism. Things are fine. And so we don't need these special provisions anymore. It's all good. Everything's fine. And the second that they announced the case, all these southern states started putting in place these voting restrictions.
The logic was so obscene. The Voting Rights Act has finally stopped the very pernicious and harmful policies that the Voting Rights Act has stopped, and therefore we no longer need the Voting Rights Act. Just one other point about this. It's a good example of how racism can foster oppression of everybody, because they are getting away with this because it plays into the racial animus that they have been using to goad their base and to maintain power, but it is ultimately an effort to suppress Democratic votes to prevent a Democratic governor who would do things like expand Medicaid and hold, the powerful interests in that state accountable. And the only way they can stop this is by using the oldest playbook in American politics, which is stopping black people from voting.
Yeah. And again, I mean, this connects directly to the Kavanaugh nomination too, because one of the ways in which Anthony Kennedy was slightly more moderate than some of the other conservatives on the bench was in the voting rights area. And it is clear that Kavanaugh has views that are much closer to Thomas and Roberts in this case, and a lot of the other conservatives, than he did Kennedy and the liberals on the court. Yeah. And these, a Supreme Court hands down a decision like that, that's a big deal, because basically what we're left with now is states with Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures can institute things like automatic voter registration and early voting and all the things that make voting easier. But a lot of these Republican states, if they decide to do what Georgia did, there's not a lot of recourse with the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act as they did. Yeah,
you can really, we talk about how important the midterms are. We talk about how important it is, in part because a lot of these state officials will help determine the representation in Congress in the years ahead. There is this, you talk about these stories, whether it's the EPA story and them turning over the EPA to industry, or the tax story, or this voting rights story, and you really do feel like we're at a tipping point where we really are running out of time, because I think people at a certain point will give up. They will give up if they see the fact that no matter what they do, that this democracy doesn't work for them, that the rules don't apply to them, that their vote won't matter, they won't have a chance to vote, that they'll be stripped of their right to vote, that these powerful interests will win in the government no matter what they do. And we have to stop them. There's just no other. I was really, the collection of horrendous news coming out about what these people are doing really clarified that for me. Not that it wasn't clear before, but there's only so many chances we'll get to stop this. That's a bummer. It is a bummer, but we should be honest about it, because I think for a long time we weren't honest about just how bad things had gotten, and that's what, to me, this was a reminder of.
Well, the ACLU is fighting the effort. They can get a petition drive. They might be able to stop it, which is good.
Oh, absolutely. This one, of course, we should fight to stop this. Of course, I'm just saying that, this.
We get you.
That's all.
We get you. And we didn't even mention the White House firing the white nationalist conference attending speechwriter on Friday, in case you don't think that there's enough stories about
not usually a lot of white nationalists.
Yeah, the only
I was referencing earlier. Yeah, it's pervasive.
The only white nationalist conference white House employees are allowed to attend are in the East Room.
But once again, one way to stop this in this election and to take over not just Congress but state houses across the country is to vote. And going back to Vote Save America, one of the best parts of this is you can check your voter registration. Some people were already checking it and saying, "Oh, I thought I was registered, but apparently I was taken off the voter rolls for some reason," which many states are doing all across the country. So it's important to check your registration, make sure your friends check their registration, and then make sure to register as many people to vote as you can. When we come back, we will have Tommy's interview with Johanna Hayes.